week, which I was here for, pretty sure. But who remembers what we talked about last week? We started off with cognitive bias. What do we remember about bias?
We all have them.
We all have them. Yeah. Are we aware of all our bias? No, we got both those conscious and unconscious bias. Can we as coaches bring awareness to our unconscious bias? Yeah, through self-reflection, other exercise, and that self-awareness piece, and using exhibiting those quality a coach that coaches use. And as a coach, do we feel that we can check our biases at the door as we enter with a client? Let me rephrase that. Do we feel that as coaches we're able to manage our bias when we're engaging with our clients? How about as coaches, do you think we should attempt to manage our bias when we engage with clients? Yeah. And that's it's one of those things too, really, when we're talking about biases, we all got them, they're informed from our experiences, our culture. The media influences a lot of people. They come from different places, but if we're truly going to be coaching and we're going to come with a non-judgmental approach and we're going to try on that skill set, of listening to understand, of really listening where somebody's coming from, we're going to work and hope to reach that perfection and think that we can manage them, understanding that we are humans. We never fully may be able to fully do that, but just that awareness piece and being the best coach that we can for our client, and knowing that there may be situations where we come up against as a coach because of maybe the client biases or maybe our own biases, that maybe we're not the best fit for that client. And if we're really about that client, we're going to try and get them to somebody that maybe can work with them a little better than we can. And then we talked about trauma informed care, and the big thing around trauma informed care is, again, we're going to manage our judgments, understand that trauma, people come with trauma, and trauma is really an individualized experience. People experience trauma differently. And again, with our coaching qualities and non-judgment, listening to understand, we can really be there and use trauma informed care with our clients. And it helps us reduce that rescuing urge, feeling like we got to fix somebody, and being able to hold space for better hold space for individuals. And then the last thing from last week that we talked about is nonviolent communication. And if you remember, I went over that, and it's really just a style of communication that fits very well in the coaching process with what we're doing, the holding space, the listening to understand, the reflecting back, the validating and affirming that we use as coaches. And that's a quick recap of last week. And now I got the first module, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And I really, in order for this to be impactful, I'm going to really need some group participation with this as we go over coaching around the stages of change. And we're going to do a quick recap because we've gone over the stages of change already. Can someone tell me what the first stage of change is? Trans-theoretical model of change. What's the first stage?
Is it pre-contemplation?
Pre-contemplation. Yeah. Thinking about thinking. Thinking about something. Pre-contemplation. And the next stage is
contemplation.
actually doing some thinking. And then after contemplation, we have
Preparation?
you guys are like rock stars, nailing it. Preparation. We're getting ready to, what are we getting ready to do?
Action?
Action. Almost like you guys saw this somewhere before. And then once we get action, we've been fairly successful. We've been doing it for a while. We're going to
Celebrate.
yes, but as we're celebrating, we're gonna keep
Is it maintaining? Maintenance?
maintenance. There we go. Yeah. And then, we've been doing it for a while. We've been maintaining this for a little time. And then, Mike Tyson said everybody has a plan till they get punched in the face. Well, life stood up and punched us in the face. And what could possibly happen? Relapse. We may fall back in our old ways and where we were at with it. Yeah. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go through each one of the stages. And I'm going to stop sharing because now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say pre-contemplation. Someone define that stage. A little more detail than what I did. A little more than thinking about thinking.
They're considering doing something.
Yeah, considering doing something, the likelihood of them actually doing something in the real short term is low, and it's more likely that it's probably going to be a 30 to or I mean 90 to 180 day window, that pre-contemplation still. And now here's the questions are going to get progressively harder. What might you hear a client say in this stage? Somebody's thinking about thinking. What might you hear them? What kind of things might they say?
I might try to do this.
I might try to do this. What's something else they show might say in this pre-contemplation?
I know that X is bad for me.
Yeah, that's a good, you'll hear that a lot. I know that X is bad for me, and the example in my head always goes to is smokers. Everybody knows cigarette smoking's bad for them. It's written on everything and science is there. Not too many people dispute it, but I know smoking's bad for me, but it's the only way I release stress. I know smoking's bad for me, but I get to take 15 more breaks than my coworkers because I smoke. So, you know, that pre-contemplation stage. And what skills, thinking back to the coaching skills, that open inquiry, reflections, validation, affirmation, different things. What skills do you think a coach would use in this stage?
I'm not going to use the right label, but is it kind of attaching it to their map and what's meaningful to them and their goals?
Yeah, mapping it back to the map. Link that possibility of change back to their values, their vision for them best selves. You know, and a way that we can do that is through open inquiry, reflecting what they're saying. And one of the open inquiry, is getting them to paint you a picture of a vision of what it looks like. And I'll use smoking again. What's your life look like if, 6 months from now you're not smoking anymore? How do you feel? What's your life look like? That open inquiry, that's a skill that we can use there. And that mapping back to the map is always a valuable tool to do. What should the coach not do? I guess that's a little easier question.
Will not discourage them or disempower them.
Not discourage and disempower them. Yeah. What else? What else should a coach not do?
I would also
Tell them what to do.
Tell them what to do, Brian. As coaches, we're not directive. We shouldn't stand up there. You need to quit smoking or you're going to die. We're not telling them what to do. And then Jennifer, you had something to add too?
I was just gonna say, sorry, now I was writing down, I lost my thought. My bad. Or not encourage them to be unrealistic. Like, I was gonna say, like, gas them up too much, because I think that can be tempting too if they're like getting really excited. Because I think part of like SMART goals is being realistic too.
Yeah. And I'm going to try and do a little reframe on that. And because one of our things that we do as coaches is we meet clients where they're at. And, meeting them where they're at and understanding, that's one of the things that it's important for us as coaches to understand with like this trans-theoretical model. It's not for us to put labels on a client. It's to inform us so we're better able to meet the client where they're at. And we can still come with that non-judgmental approach. Now we're going to move in and we're going to, same questions pretty much, but we're going to do this 5 more times, but now we're going to do it around contemplation. So how would we define this stage, contemplation?
I know smoking's bad for me, and I am thinking of ways that I can reduce how I smoke.
Spot on. Smoking's bad for me, and I'm thinking about ways I can quit it. And in this stage, contemplation, they're actually thinking about it. Maybe they're starting to raise some pros and cons, but there's still maybe a little bit of ambivalence towards changing. They can still see reasons to change and reasons not to change. And you answered question 2, Carrie. Thank you. What might you hear a client say? Any other examples of what we might hear a client say in this contemplation stage?
I know I need to make the change, and they've kind of really thought through the idea that they need to make the change.
Yeah, I need to make the change. And in that other language, that you may hear in this stage, we have identified values and visions. My significant other really wants me to quit smoking, but yet they still have some ambivalence, or I want to go back to school, but I don't know if I can afford it. That all that kind of talk around seeing the pros and cons of both sides of the change and not making this change. And what are some skills the coach uses in this stage? Looking for a big one in particular. It's a special type of reflection that can be really useful.
Elicit, provide, elicit.
Elicit, provide, elicit is a skill that we'd use in this stage, you know. If we notice a gap in somebody's knowledge level, because we're going to elicit from them what they know about something, provide them a little bit of information and elicit back from them, you know, what they're taking away from what we said. And the other one that I'm thinking of is that double-sided reflection, you know, to where we land on the side of change, you know. You understand smoking is bad for you. And no, I got to rephrase that. I got to start over. You know, smoking helps you to de-stress, and you know it also impacts your long-term health. You know, that double-sided reflection where you're given equal weight to both sides of it can be useful in this contemplation stage when we're working with clients. And what should the coach not do? Couple things actually.
Interrupt,
Interrupt, Brian.
redirect.
Yeah, we're going to use that non-judgment, and we're going to use a guiding style. So we're going to not interrupt them, not interrupt their exploration as they go through this. You know, we're going to support them through that exploration by using double-sided reflections, deeper inquiry, but we're not going to like interrupt them and just like try and push them towards the change. What else should a coach not do in that contemplation stage?
Maybe don't lead them into thoughts, just hold space and let them reflect on what they're thinking through.
Yeah.
Explore.
Yeah, and that's one of the things, and that's an important notice, Jennifer, because one of the things, especially early on in coaches early in development, is I want to get to that SMART goal. I want to get to that action step. Is they won't allow the appropriate time for this exploration and for them to positively link it to their values, their vision, their map in order to move forward. And you can derail somebody by, you know, hearing someone say, I want to quit smoking. Oh, how are you going to quit smoking? You know, you got to explore, you want to quit smoking, and then take that time in this stage to explore that with them as we go forward. What about preparation? Somebody define preparation for me.
They're making a plan and making sure that they have everything they need to put that plan into action.
They're dotting the I's, crossing the T's. Maybe they've gone as far as to maybe write something down and where they're going. And you know, preparation is kind of, it can be a little bit of a gray area too, because it can, you know, for some people, preparation can possibly bleed in, and I'm supposed to use nonviolent communication, can possibly leak into that that action stage. And by that I mean, you know, somebody's goal may be around moving the body, and they're going to start they're going to start by going on walks, and they want to walk 20 minutes a week, but they're still in preparation stage because maybe they don't even have walking shoes or shoes that they can walk in. So kind of their action step in the preparation stage is to buy those walking shoes so they can get out there and go walk. And that's something that's setting them up for what they're really wanting to do, is have that long-term lifestyle of being an active walker. And all they got is cowboy boots and I don't know what's another pair of boots. Carhartt make boots. Yeah, Carhartt's probably not good to walk in. But what do you suppose in the preparation stage the coach should not do?
Give the client, like tell them how to prepare, allow them to come up with how they might prepare their way.
Yeah. Again, you guys are spot on. We're going to guide them. We're not, once they say, I want to do this, I'm getting ready to do this, we shouldn't lay out we shouldn't lay out their action plan steps for them. We should allow them to prepare and allow them to explore it. And, if we're sitting here and we're in the preparation stage with somebody and we're not going to tell them what to do and we're not going to give them A, B, and C, what are some examples and some questions the coach should be asking that client in the preparation stage?
Maybe like what would make it easier for you to reach that goal?
What would make it easier for you to get to where you're going?
What their strengths are. This is where I can ask them what their strengths are and kind of put those things together or help them put those things together.
Re-identify those strengths. And another way we can identify those strengths is, as coaches, we can listen for those strengths and reflect them back to them as well when we hear them bring up their strengths as we're going through that. What's another question that we can ask them?
It's not really a question, but well, I guess it starts that way, is kind of brainstorming.
Yeah, and preparation, so brainstorming can be a very useful technique in brainstorming, because sometimes in preparation we're ready to get started, but we don't know where to start. So we throw out that, seek that permission. How about we brainstorm some ideas on how you might start? And we explain brainstorming, no ideas too ridiculous, blah, blah, blah. We're just going to popcorn them out. You throw an idea out, I'll throw an idea out. And we'll get the 6 ideas. That's 3 apiece. And when we're done, we'll go ahead and see what you think of those. Yeah, brainstorming can be a useful tool in the preparation stage with a client. Who remembers what comes after preparation?
Action.
Action. And how do you define a word that's defined by the word? But somebody help me out here and define action.
Following through on your commitments.
Yeah. Doing. They're actually actively doing things, actively smoking less, actively walking more, actively eating better. Those are all things that they're doing. What are we going to hear the client say in the action phase? I'll help you out a little bit. You've all set out to do something and then you started doing it. What are the kind of things you said when you're actually doing something you set out to do?
What you actually did. And usually mine is what I didn't do that I said I was going to do as well.
Yeah. You're going to hear people say things like, I set out to walk 3 times this week. I walked 2, but I feel so much better. You'll hear people say, I've cut down from 3 packs a day to 2, and I can already feel myself breathing better. I don't know if that's possible, but you're going to hear people say things like that. They're going to relate to you, things that they're doing, and they're really a lot of people that they relate how they're feeling and what's this is bringing up in them while they're performing these action steps. And here with this action stage, the clients out there doing the various degrees of success. Some of them maybe boom, boom, boom. Some of them maybe 75%, 80% hitting what they set out to hit in that action stage. What are some skills a coach can use in this stage?
Pointing out the strengths and the achievements in their strengths.
Pointing out the strengths, yeah. Reflecting back those strengths that you hear. And so many people, they get in here and they set things up and we have this, my military training tells me it's a go, no go mentality. Either I did it or I didn't. But there is such a thing, if someone wants to walk 3 days a week and they walk 2, they still walk 2 days a week. They still did something. If someone wants to cut down on smoking from 2 packs to 10 cigarettes a day and they didn't quite get there, they smoked 15, they still cut down from, I think there's 40 cigarettes in 2 packs. So they still cut down significantly. There's strengths there. As coaches, we're going to use that strength-based approach. We're going to reflect the strengths that we hear and point them out to them. We can also get them to bring out their strengths by, using that deeper inquiry here. We're going to always use those skills of holding that space, letting them explore. Another good thing here is really, this is that power of that pause to when you're able to, when they say something and that, and we're going to validate and affirm the progress that they did make. And what should the coach do? When someone's in the action stage? Kind of a lot of things we did in the other stage we shouldn't do in the other stage.
I would say like a lot of reflection, really validation and reflecting their strengths.
And again, what we shouldn't do is we shouldn't pass judgment. We shouldn't be pushing. We should maintain that guiding style with them as they explore with this action stage. And, and as coaches, especially when we get to this stage, we want to resist that urge to start cheerleading. Because that's when you want to be right there with them, celebrating with the client. We don't want to cheerlead. We want to use our reflections and our inquiry to affirm and validate what they've accomplished.
Can you give an example of the difference between validating but not cheerleading?
And this is cheerleading is about me. That's like my opinion as the coach. Mm-hmm. I think that's great. I think it's great that you hit your action step, where validating is just a simple observation of a fact. You walked 3 days this week for 20 minutes, just like you set out to do. And that's all about them. And the subtle differences in the way the brain processes, we may like take that in and, oh, they smiled and they were happy for me, but then it's still about the coach. The coach smiled and was happy for me. But when the coach makes that observation and validates them, that sticks with them and sinks in. Yeah, I did. I did it. I did it. It's about them. Did it help, Jennifer?
Yeah, that was helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. And now the maintenance stage. Maintenance, we're going to go, what do you think the client's going to, what are you going to be hearing from the client in the maintenance stage?
Things are going well. I've been able to maintain walking now for 6 months, and I've got a good routine going on.
Exactly. Yeah, and I haven't smoked a cigarette in 2 months, and those different things. And again, in the maintenance stage, what are some examples of some questions as a coach you might ask to help them maintain?
How to prepare for challenges so you can work around them.
You're going to ask them, if they anticipate any barriers, and also ask them, how did you overcome the challenges that you had early on? How did you overcome those challenges? We're going to ask questions. What's allowing you to be successful? What's supporting you in your success? And then we're going to just move into that relapse recycle. This one I want a definition for, because I really need it. I don't understand this at all. Relapse recycle.
Maybe shifting back to a former mindset or starting to doubt themselves or
Yeah.
critical mindset a little bit more.
Maybe falling back into old habits, maybe reducing the amount that they were doing. And what do you suppose you might hear a client say in this relapse recycle?
They could be real disappointed in themselves for slipping back, having accomplished so much and feeling discouraged with, slipping.
Yeah, with flipping. And then, as a coach, what skills do you think you use in this stage? And I'm going to set this up where I think a lot of clients, when they relapse or they recycle, they have a significant life event happen. It could be a loss of a job. It could be a separation. It could be a kid going off to college. It could be, a birth or a pregnancy. A significant life event happens. So around this. So what do you suppose, what are some skills a coach uses in this relapse recycle stage?
Maybe
Empathy.
You guys, same time. So I'm just going to go Margaret first.
I was going to say empathy and sympathy.
Empathy and sympathy?
Well, depends on the situation.
Yeah. Well, and that's where I'm going to say empathy is really about that client, and we're going to empathize with them and seek to understand and sympathy. Yeah, we can feel
Like if
sympathy.
somebody died.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's my own thing. I can understand that, but that's my own brain. I like that compassion piece and having compassion. Yeah. Jennifer?
I was gonna say the double-sided reflection, I feel like is helpful here. Like you're saying that, you know, it's tough right now, but look what you accomplished, or maybe say it in a different way. I'd have to think about it, but something like that.
Yeah, and with that relapse and recycle, you know, you could do that with, you just lost your job and you just had 6 months of success around X. You know, you know, and when we use those double-sided, we want to use that and instead of but, because that and lends credence to both sides because they're both important to that person. Yeah. And if someone can tell me what a coach should not do in 2 words, I'll wrap up. I just trying to make a joke. What the coach shouldn't do is say, you suck. No, as that coach, you don't want to come across like that. You don't want to, your coach should not go, why? You were doing so good. You know, what the coach does want to do, you know, is understand that relapse and recycle, do a little more exploration with them, see what the challenge was, what the barrier was, and maybe do a reassessment with them to make sure that, because oftentimes when life circumstances change, it changes our vision for ourselves. But what a coach definitely does not want to do is say, oh, you suck, you loser. And I'm making it funny, but you know, I think you guys understand what I mean. We want to still be affirming and validating. Yeah. So that was normally done as group exercises where people go out in individual rooms, but since we have a limited number of people here tonight, we went through them all together and did an exploration on them. And I'm going to open it up to questions around the stages of change. Questions around coaching around the stages of change.
In the event that a client relapses and maybe because of, like you said, a life event, if the client is not feeling like they're in a place to get back on the horse, as you would say, as far as like getting back into that routine, at that point, would you just explore more things that they may want to work on? Or like, where does that conversation go if they're not ready to continue where they left off?
And I'm going to let Haley and Charlie jump in with maybe some different experiences, but oftentimes at this point in time, you know, through exploration and such with them, if you're using an assessment tool, it may be a good spot to reset, have them refill out like a personal health inventory or something, re-explore that with them and see where they want to go. You know, I talk about intuition, spidey instinct, but you're meeting a client where they're at and you want to be able to read that client and determine, you know, what their vision of them for themselves, what their map is moving forward. If especially if they shared with you a significant life event like that. Did that help, Nicole? And, you know, I had a conversation today with one of my coaches over a topic, and he wanted a black and white answer. And he goes, that answer is so gray. I go, coaches live in the gray. That's part of being a coach, is being comfortable. And you're going to often hear me, you know, offer for instances or things like that, because coaching is all about that relationship and your read and understanding of where that client's at and what's the appropriate course of action. as you move forward with them. And it's something that's developed over time with practice. That's why we got the practice sessions that you'll do. That's why we do the mentoring. And as we encounter sessions, and even after that, you're encouraged by the code of ethics to seek out consultation and mentoring in your coaching practice. With that, if there's no further questions, I'll turn it over to Haley.
Pick me. So just to add on to what Todd was saying, I was thinking about it too. And I can use something like Margaret's example of maybe a death. You know, somebody goes through a really hard time in life, something that you can easily kind of check in with your client when you see them relapsing, or you're seeing that their goals are starting to change, is really just checking in and saying, hey, is this still important to you right now? I know you're going through a lot. Is there something else you would want to focus on? You know, just kind of shifting that and giving them the control of what they want to approach and how they want to approach it. Because life can be hard, which leads me right into what I'm about to talk about, which is resilience. I know you guys lost sleep over this. You couldn't wait to get here to hear about all this. So
They were here for me.
it's true. I know. So share my screen here. I got these little pop-ups. Do you guys see the little pop-ups on the top of your screen, or is it just the slides? Just slide. Okay, cool. As long as you don't see it, then I'm fine. So let's talk about resilience. What is resilience to you? In your words, when you hear that word, what does that mean? Just jump in and tell me.
I think like the ability to bounce back and go through things, like actually go through it though and come out on the other side.
I like that, to actually go through it. So we tend to try to not go through it. I like that, and bounce back. Margaret, I saw you come off mute.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's your ability to deal with things that you may not expect or that may not be part of your normal day-to-day life, part of the plan.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not part of the plan. I'd almost say sometimes resilience too can come from your everyday, though. It is part of the plan. You still have to build stuff up to get through it, right? Life is exhausting. I have trouble getting up in the morning sometimes. How many of you on a Thursday night would rather be sitting on the couch watching TV than in a course having to use your brain right now? Right? Like, you're right. You're tired sometimes, and that's okay. So when we talk about resilience, we're talking about the capacity to prepare for, recover from, or adapt in the face of stress, challenge, or adversity. So we like to think of this a little bit like a battery, like you're recharging that battery. And you can learn to build a resilience capacity and sustain your energy over time. There are techniques that help you to kind of charge up that battery, or to keep a little bit of that charge kind of at bay, just in case you need it, right? Instead of expending everything all at once and then just running on low. I say that, but we tend to do it anyway. So basically, we are an energy system. And you'll notice on these slides, by the way, this has heart math on it. And I'm going to give them credit for these because we learned from heart math about resilience and how to build resilience capacity. And so they let us use their material to teach with. So Charlie and I went through their course. So I'll just give credit where credit is due. But heart math is a little bit like a biofeedback. They kind of look at heart rate to tell you where you are in a situation or in a time and a place. So that's how they measure what's going on with your body. So when we're talking about ourselves being energy, you have to think about where our energy goes throughout the day or throughout the week or whatever. So we talk about physical flexibility. your endurance, your strength, right? Physically, where are you in life? Talk about mental flexibility. This is one we tend to lean towards when we think about resilience. Where's our attention span, our ability to focus, incorporate multiple points of view? You know, we talked about biases last week. Can we sit back and take in those views, right? And not expend even more energy trying to fight it. Emotional flexibility, so a positive outlook in life or a self-regulation. These are the things that are going to help you over time to hold on to that energy source or build it up. Spiritual flexibility, so commitment to your own values and tolerate others' values and beliefs. Again, not fighting it just because it's somebody else's viewpoint or belief system, right? So if we're building this up and we're working on our resilience, we have a coherence. That's the word they like to use in heart math. We're trying to get to coherence, kind of that equal stage, that equilibrium, homeostasis, whatever word you want to use. Yeah, I went to school one time and they made me use that word. So I try to throw it in every now and then. It was a very expensive piece of paper I had to get. So I like to use those big words sometimes. All right. So I told you about heart rate, right? With heart math. So here's kind of a way that they looked at this. So this is a husband and a wife arguing. You can put this in any situation you've ever been with. If it's you and your kids, you and your brother and sister, mom or dad, doesn't have to be husband and wife, but in this specific scenario, the wife said something specifically that got under the husband's skin. And you see at about between 15 and 20 minutes when they were having that argument, exactly where that was said, and you start to see that heart rate go up. You guys see that? Now, what do you see over time with that heart rate? If I'm looking at it, I'm seeing the time continuing to lapse, and that heart rate is staying at a pretty high pace. And even whenever you kind of get to that 35, 40-minute range, it continues to stay elevated. What you're doing right there is you are expending energy. So if I am expending energy, and this is on that physical side, probably mental side too, because now he's just stirring over it, right? This is one of those arguments where you just kind of sit on it and you're mad. So your heart rate continues to stay up and your energy level is depleting. This is that battery. It's starting to run down. So we got to think about, even in situations that happen on a daily basis or may happen every now and then, how do we recharge that battery? And it's going to be different for everybody. This is not a one size fits all kind of approach for resilience. So you have to think about, what is it that you would be doing to bring that heart rate down? What works best for you? So energy balance, this is that constant energy expenditure without the balance of adequate rest and recovery, and that will lead to burnout. Has anybody here ever experienced burnout? Yeah. And it's not necessarily, it doesn't even have to deal with jobs. I know we talk a lot about work that can burn you out, but family can burn you out. Having to pay your bills can burn you out. There's a lot of different situations that can burn you out. So we have to think about leveling that out. What is it that we can do to put energy back into those batteries? If we don't, and that scale tips the other direction, here's what that's going to look like over time. At the beginning, you're embracing those challenges and you're improving your performance. You face the challenge, you see it coming, you're like, let's do this. I got this, right? Then you'll hit that kind of high peak. You're at maximum efficiency. You are pushing the limit, whether it's you physically getting in shape, you are doing everything at work, working overtime, doing everything you got to do to get there. And then you hit kind of a plateau where you start to level out and you go back down just a bit because you are hyper reactive stage. This is the point where you have put everything into this, all your energy, and now little things are starting to pick at you. Little things start to hurt. They start to wear you down. They start to kind of push your buttons, right? And then you get to that breakdown stage. That's when that energy really starts to deplete and you are emotionally exhausted. And that's where we find ourselves usually by the end of the week, right? If we put everything into it, we are exhausted by the weekend. We don't have much more to give. So, how do we level that off? Well, we keep recharging that battery. We keep pushing and doing the different skill sets and the different things that do that fill us up personally. We keep working on those things. And like I said, it's not a one size fits all. This is different for different people. So this is the time for you to think about all the different things that are going to help you over time. What are the things that fill your cup? What are the things that charge the batteries for you? What's going to level that off? So I have a short movie here for you. It's got 2 parts. Bear with me because the first part is a little hard on you sometimes. But I want to get some feedback afterwards. Tell me how it goes for you. Let me know if you can't hear it. Okay. Tell me what you thought about that. The first part versus the second part of that video.
Yikes, the first part.
Yikes, is right.
It felt very overwhelming and overstimulating and stressful and anxiety provoking and all of the things. And then the second part was much more zen and tolerable and made me feel calm and not freak out.
What changed? The first and second part of that video, it looked exactly the same. What
The
changed?
music,
The music.
the sound, what was happening, like the noise, all the noise.
Mm-hmm. So that's just one example of how we can see the world. It could be the exact same thing, but it depends on the eyes that we're seeing it through. Basically, the soundtrack of our emotions. If we are emotionally just not prepared, if we are overwhelmed and we are not taking care of ourselves, that first part of that video, that's what Monday mornings sometimes can feel like, right? But have you ever been in a situation where things are just kind of crazy, but you're just sitting there looking around at the world going, this is a beautiful place. I love everything about this. It's your emotional state. That's the world that you're seeing through those emotions. So this is short and sweet and to the point, but it's just to give you a little taste on resilience and keeping those batteries full. And we are going to now go over to Charlie, and he's going to keep giving you some of those skills to recharge those batteries.
So I will add one thing in here, and maybe Haley hit on this, is so what were those domains of resilience again?
I'll pull them back up for you. Hang on.
Physical, emotional, spiritual. That's all I got.
So emotional, what was it again? Spiritual,
Physical.
physical, mental.
Mental.
Yeah.
Okay. So which one of these domains do you think you deplete the most energy in?
Does it depend? Like I would say mental. Oh, or
You'd say
emotional.
mental. Anybody else?
Physical for me.
Physical. Yeah, so actually the one that it is emotional, right? So if you really think about it, if you get into a fight with your significant other, you're more depleted than whenever you're doing something of a mental capacity or a physical capacity. Typically, those are the moments that deplete you so much more is the emotional, part of that. So, part of going into that video, with that intense piece was more activating emotions, right? So then it felt a little bit more depleting whenever you were going into that versus the other side. So, even if you go back to the one slide that talks about the husband arguing with the wife, right? Like that lasted a whole lot longer. Like if you do a workout for like to exert yourself physically, your heart rate variability would not stay that way that long. And if you were doing something mentally, let's just say, sitting down and create math problems. I don't think that's a poor one, but even like in a work environment, you got your boards up and you're creating and doing all those things like that might be exhausting at the end of the day, but it doesn't exactly increase or decrease your heart rate variability, right? Like it may be in that moment, but overall, it's really the emotional states that we're in from time to time that create and maintain stress throughout our body. Now, what happens whenever we have a lot of stress built up in our body?
All kinds of stuff. You can get sick. I mean, well, I guess that's the first thing that comes to my mind. It's just it lowers your immune system and leaves you vulnerable for all kinds of sicknesses.
Inflammation.
Inflammation. Yeah, yeah. And then, yeah, so definitely leading to sickness, right? We know being stressed out, right? Like it causes us to have, the flu or a cough or, something, right? We break out, like something happens because we are so stressed out during those times. So, I wanted to kind of go back and talk a little bit about this because whenever we really start to think about, the stress inside of our body, a lot of times it's being held by emotions. And no matter the population that you work with, no matter what you do, you will always have emotions. And if they're building it up, if anybody ever wants to talk about stress and or wants to do research on stress in the body, there's a book called The Body Keeps the Score. It's I forget how old it is, but it's a good book to kind of read. It really talks about stress inside the body. And, I know we talked about the atomic nervous system at one point. I can't remember if that was last week or the week before. I think it was last week, but we're going to talk a little bit about the window of tolerance again today. And whenever we think about, you know, not just resilience, but our ability to bounce back, we have to also think about our physical capabilities, but whenever we're coaching people, we also have to think about that emotional turmoil that they go through day in, day out. And we have to find ways to assess it. We know that work causes a lot of stress, right? How many people here have ever been stressed out at work? How many times has it ever caused an emotional reaction because of it, right? Yeah, absolutely. So, it's the emotional piece to it that ends up holding us hostage and holding our bodies hostage to where we feel like crap because we're so stressed out and we think it's a mental and we need to do something just mentally, but really it's the physical body as well that we also need to focus on, keep it moving, right? Do the things that we got to do instead of just sitting there. We as humans weren't meant to be in a 90-degree angle for 8 hours a day and then you go lay down for another 8 hours a day So then you're spending, just 8 hours of that day doing other things. And I guarantee you're sitting at a 90-degree angle in the other 80-degree or the other 8 hour time frame a lot longer than you need to as well, right? So I think it's just important to kind of know and have a working definition of resilience, but really know the areas that really deplete people more. And I don't think it's that bad to maybe even create your own, whether it's these domains that you think, but maybe even something to where you can show your clients, these are the these are the buckets of domain, and where you're spending your time sometimes can be very, depleting. And if you're using a lot of emotion on all the time, if you have a lot of compassion, if you have a lot of all these other things, you're going to be depleting at a whole lot higher rate. So you need to be coming up with a very strong wellness plan, right? So if you're working in populations with, depressed women, but actually I would say any population, because I'll talk about that a little bit, because every population that we work with, trauma will come up, right? There's no way around it. Trauma will come up, whether you're working with executives, whether you're working with college students, whether you're working with parents, whoever it is, you are going to experience some type of trauma. And you're going to have that come up in your sessions on a day-to-day basis. So as we talk about that, let's go ahead and hold on one second. Start talking about mindful resilience for compassion fatigue. So we'll do an introduction, and then we'll take a break here in about 5-ish so minutes. And then I want to have everybody kind of go to a website while we're on break and fill out this inventory. But we're going to go through this today. We're going to have an introduction, talk about the window of tolerance, 5 mindful tools to build resilience, compassion and compassion fatigue, burnout, vicarious trauma, compassion satisfaction and vicarious resilience, mindful empathy, self-care, and creating awareness. And whenever we go through this, another thing to kind of think of sometimes, depending on where you're coaching at, you're probably going to be coaching on an island, right? So if you don't have a self-care plan in place and a support system, you're going to be having a difficult time because you won't have that support system that a lot of people have whenever they're inside of an agency. So, keep that in mind as we kind of move forward through these different topics. So mindful resilience for compassion fatigue, there's all kinds of things that come up, like I talked about, right? Like everybody experiences trauma, and that trauma is going to come up whenever we are working with our clients. Sometimes it might even come in the form of transference or countertransference. And what I mean by that is if we closely work with people that relate to a struggle or a area of interest for us, then a lot of times we're very well connected to that. When we talk about depleting energy, right? Emotions, whenever we're emotionally connected to it on top of everything else, we are going to deplete energy in our work so much faster. So again, I'll say that, if we are invested in our work so much that we are emotionally tied to it, then work is going to deplete us so much more than anything else. Another thing that might deplete us more, of course, is burnout and these other things. But just remember, whenever we're emotionally tied to it, we are going to deplete that energy so much more. So really, and then another thing that we'll talk about is vicarious trauma, but just really hearing trauma a lot of times can create problems for us, right? It can spark things for us, whether it's the transference of that. So even if it is somebody who you're in the middle of a coaching session, and whether, coaching isn't therapy, but people are very vulnerable within these coaching sessions, right? I'm sure you all may have experienced that just in the, few sessions that you all got coached. over, that few weeks, right? And then you'll probably really experience it over the next, 7 weeks or so, 8 weeks that we're in now. So keep that in mind, is trauma will come up, and then you are going to experience it, and you are going to have some type of reaction to that, and you need to be prepared for it. So whenever we talk about mindful resilience for compassion fatigue, it really starts with recognizing signs and symptoms, putting tools in place that help prevent it, right, or minimize it, and then treat it through deliberate practice. Whenever I also think about recognizing signs and symptoms, it's really about assessment, right? How are we going to start building our own awareness to understand those things? So whenever we break down mindful resilience for compassion fatigue, the act of recognizing, preventing, treating compassion fatigue is not something that you do once. This is an ongoing process. And I may have said this before, but tools in the shed never build a house, right? We have to practice. If you're, wanting to work out any type of muscle, like, you have to practice at it. You have to do it on a consistent basis. So if you're not practicing these tools and you don't have some type of self-care plan, then, you're going to be more susceptible to compassion fatigue and burnout and those types of things. So next we're going to talk about the window of tolerance, but first we'll go ahead and take a break. But what I want to do before we take a break, so don't leave yet, is I want to, because we'll breeze through the window of tolerance, because I think we pretty much covered a lot of that last week or the week before, whenever we met. But I want to, now I got to find the website again. I want you all to go to this website, because again, it's about building awareness. And then this website will talk about burnout and your potential for burnout. So let's take this. This shouldn't take that long. I think it says like 7 minutes or something to fill out. It's like 40 questions. So 10 minutes, but then let's just take a 15-minute break. How does that sound? So then that'll give everybody time to go get water, use the bathroom if they need to, and fill this out. Does that sound reasonable?
Yep.
Okay. So we'll be back 30 minutes after the hour.
Back on, Charlie? I think my Bluetooth is out.
You're muted, Charlie.
Turned my camera on, but I didn't hit my unmute button. I was saying, were y'all getting hit in Mississippi where the storm's coming through, or
It's
Nicole?
about to, yeah, it's about to hit relatively hard. So I'm in Gulf Shores, Alabama right now. It's spring break, and I'll be damned if I went on spring break and all of my college students followed me. Talk about quality of life, like burnout.
I bet.
Yeah.
I just went to go
Hey.
check out the golf ball size hail that just dropped.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I feel like you're probably right in the middle of it all, aren't you?
Yeah, we just had a second wind of hail, and we've had our roof replaced already about 3 years ago, and we had it repaired about a year and a half ago. And I just have a newer car to us in the driveway that I didn't pull in, so regretting that.
Yeah, I
Where are
bet.
you, Nicole?
I'm in Indiana.
Indiana. I'm in Tennessee, so it's supposed to hit us in the Nashville area around 12 or 1 o'clock. So looking
Well, I
forward
had
to being
some
up late.
good size hail, so enjoy your
Great.
ice balls.
Pull your car into the garage if you got one.
Yes, pull your car in if you have a garage. We
Oh.
were working on a project, so I have the garage full of project stuff, and I haven't put any of it away, so that's why the car's in the driveway. And of course, the one time I don't have the car in the garage is the time that it hails. So there we go.
That's how it works.
Mhm.
Colorado, we're being slammed with snow. So we got the snowstorm, y'all got the, you know, bigger storm or whatever you want to call it, regular storm.
Well, when I was bragging earlier about it being 80 degrees, that just means it's going to be a nice storm.
That's
It's
right.
Yeah,
getting
it's like
really good and
storm,
hot.
tornadoes.
Yeah, good times.
Every time we let our dogs out, we have one that's not even like 4 pounds, 5 pounds, and it, can't get in the snow at all right now. But the other ones come back in just covered in snow, just
Mhm.
covered because they can't even really they're just galloping in it. That's what they're doing. I hate them all.
Hey, did you know you can get the snow and ice off of your doodles with a what are those little
Or
yeah,
Whisk or whatever they
yeah,
are.
yeah.
Yeah. TikTok. I learn everything from TikTok. I can't believe
Same.
it, man.
That's where I got my master's degree, TikTok University.
That's right, TikTok University. All right, everybody. Well, I guess enough about the weather. So everybody who filled that out, how was that filling out the pro qual, the quality of life, basically, index?
I'm probably going to shoot that out to my coworkers, quite frankly. We do kind of like EAPs, if you will, wellness coaching for fraternities. And you can imagine there's a lot of like unhealthy behaviors that happen in that space, and sleep deprivation, a lot of trauma. I was going through it and I found it to be very reflective of some things that I've kind of guesstimated about myself. I like this job a lot, but I'm experiencing some like moderate burnout, and it's affecting my quality of life.
Yeah, so notice and recognizing and bringing into awareness that there's some burnout going on. And then recognizing in other people, right? Trying to figure out. So going back to that helping person, right? You just can't get it out of your head, right? You gotta immediately think of somebody else instead of yourself.
Mhm.
All right. How about anybody else? How was that for everybody else?
I thought it was a really great scale too. I feel like it would be something beneficial to use at work. And while I was doing it, I knew where I would land on it now in the last 30 days, but I could see me taking that 2 years ago in the position I was in. And it would have been a completely different thing. So like how the difference is, I can see how that score could really be reflective of where you're at that time.
Right. So reflective of where you're at, right? Kind of meeting where it. So life events, whatever, right? Just switching jobs, right? Sounds like it was great for you, but for some people, sometimes it's not so great, right? You switch a job and it's not as great. So maybe that might cause, more stress and more quality of life issues. But whenever we think of these quality of life issues and we think of these problems and we think about resilience, whenever we're burnt out at work and whenever y'all are thinking that way, how emotionally tied to that were you all?
Extremely, like
Yeah.
so extremely tied to that.
So then we talk about the, draining and depleting of your resilience and ability to bounce back and be able to replenish your resiliency battery, right? Like you just can't do it because you're so emotionally tied to the outcomes that are going on at work, right? And then if work is crap, right? Then next thing you know, we're going to be completely burnt out. And again, the body will keep the score, right? We're going to feel that tension in our bodies. We're going to get sick. Our joints are going to be bad. Our muscles are going to cramp, right? We're going to have all that stuff going on. So let me go back to sharing my screen. I think that is a great tool, right? And I think the biggest piece that we have to remember is bringing these types of things into awareness. So whether we're coaching, whether it's ourselves, whether it's colleagues, we need to have I guess, base screening tool for bringing things into awareness. There's other ways to bring things into awareness, but I feel like a quality of life measure can kind of help guide people in that direction, right? And kind of understand, and it can really create good value conflict conversations, right? Because on one hand, you absolutely hate your job, and then on the other hand, right, you got to feed your family, right, or whatever it is, right? It's a good time to kind of reflect on those values. So I won't talk about the window of tolerance too much because I know we pretty much talked about this last week, but just kind of as a review, try and get my pointer to work here. There we go. Whenever we are in high arousal, whenever we talk about the atomic nervous system, because another thing to remember is the atomic nervous system is directly correlated to your window of tolerance, right? And your ability to have that window of tolerance. And I would also argue that it is a part of that resiliency factor too, as well, right? As you need to learn to regulate your atomic nervous system to be able to rebuild your window of tolerance or get back in your window of tolerance or rebuild your resilience. And then whenever we're up here, again, that means we, are in high anxiety, right? We are in this fight and flight type of response, right? We're going to run. Whenever we're down here, we are more in a depressive, catatonic state. So if we're seeing people with more depressive type symptoms, they're outside of their window of tolerance, right? And how can we help people get back into their window of tolerance? Those things that we need to think about. This, whenever we're up here, defend, escape, retaliate, avoid, and shut down, you'll see these in other diagrams whenever they talk about the window of tolerance. But ultimately, this is still the same things that we talk about, right? You're going to be defensive. You're going to want to escape, right? That's that flight part of it, right? You want to escape it for whatever reasons. Retaliate. We want to, lash out at whoever or whatever. We want to do that's whenever we're in that fight or flight type of response. And then whenever we're in that faint and freeze response, right, we're down here in this avoid and shut down, right? That's whenever we internalize, we start to have some of that negative self-talk creep in, and then we shut down more. And I think what I showed this diagram before, but ultimately we have a stressful event. Because of the stressful event, we're outside of our comfort zone. And then we start to be a little bit more settling into a defensive stance, right? We're going to sit here and eat for comfort. And then we're going to come down and, feel all right for a while, then come down and feel, some negative self-talk. I'm fat and disgusting failure, which leads to shame, back up, self-directed. But now what I would like to As Haley comes on eating eating a donut. I don't know what she's eating. But anyway, we seen this last week. And one thing that I really wanted to show this week was more of this one, right? Is whenever we really start to think about that and we think about the past slide, right? We had some type of compassion fatigue, right? Some type of event that hit us. And then instead of eating for comfort, right, we have a breathing practice that we really practice, right? So whenever we start to notice ourselves outside of our window of tolerance because we're having this urge to go overeat, go have this urge to go eat some sugar, right? Or whatever it is, we're noticing that we're starting to be outside of our window of tolerance. And then now we have a breathing practice that we implement instead, right? So then that puts us back into where we can handle things. And then instead of this negative self-talk, I forget what the negative self-talk was, I'm fat and disgusting or whatever it is. Whenever that negative self-talk really hits, and then we have this shame, right? This feeling of shame. Here we have some type of physical exercise. Right here we have, sun salutations because this is more yoga driven, but this could really be any mindful moment, right? Like exercise comes in so many different forms. I'll add on here, if you look at the blue zones, because I know we talked about that on the day that we had the social determinants of health, but whenever we talk about blue zones, they do physical exercise that is like natural movements in that. I don't know if people have watched that or not, but are looked into the research. But the people who live in blue zones, they do more gardening, right? They do more walking. They do more of those types of natural movements. So it doesn't have to be some type of yoga or whatever. It could be Tai Chi. It could be other types of physical activity. And then you start to feel better. And then up here, whenever we had, um, kind of that self-directed anger, right? Just kind of self-defeating stuff, then we'd have a meditation practice or some type of mindfulness practice. Doesn't necessarily have to be yoga nidra, but some type of practice with intention can help right here. And then we go back down, and then instead of having anger with other people and kind of then withdrawing and doing all these other things through here, we practice boundaries, right? And have some type of practice around boundaries. So whenever we hear this and we see, the window of tolerance, I know before we've always talked about it in ways of, the issues that are happening whenever we see this. But how does it feel looking at this, or what it comes up for you all whenever you look at this and you see like the different exercises that can get you back within your window of tolerance?
What's the question you're asking?
Well, maybe let me ask it this way, is how do you all see that you could use this in your life, knowing the different types of exercises that you could use to stay in your window of tolerance?
I feel like this graph points out like the intention of just self-assessment, like being aware of how you're feeling or experiencing your environment, your world, and knowing where you feel best.
Yeah. So really kind of bringing back into that awareness, making sure that we're kind of aware of the different symptoms, but then also the practices that help us stay inside of our window of tolerance, right? Again, it doesn't have to be these practices. It could be any practice that we do.
You mentioned gardening, and that is something for me that is a very meditative activity. So I do find that when I am stressed, just going out in the yard, and even if it's work, it is somehow stress relieving. And so I just go work in the yard.
Absolutely. And gardening, again, whenever I seen that on the blue zones, I was like, I mean, that makes so much sense, right? Because you got to squat, you got to get back up, you got to get down and then work with your hands, so you're not just squatting or getting on your knees. You're moving in so many different ways and just doing gardening, right? And so I think there's so many different types of things that we can do.
Yeah, there's a lot of actually breathing exercises I learned from avoiding lower back strain from gardening, because you also have the other side of that where you don't squat properly, then you have pain later. So There's like breathing techniques and squatting properly and all that I've had to work through with a PT from gardening.
That's that is a double-edged sword, isn't it? Right? Talk about gardening and then have to, focus on the forms and different things like that. And that's interesting. Okay, so I'm kind of moving on into the 5 tools of mindful resilience. So here we want to expand the window of tolerance, right? We want to be able to stay within our window of tolerance and get back into that window of tolerance. So these 5 tools are ones that kind of stand out, that kind of help. Breathing, meditation, mindful movement, guided rest, and gratitude. And whenever we think about breathing, right, there's so many different things that go into breathing that people have no idea about. I could probably do an entire workshop solely on the power of the breath. And a lot of times people have no idea even how to breathe. And I think that's so important to think about because so many times people breathe with that vertical breath, right? And we want to get away from that vertical breath. And we want to make sure that we're breathing with our diaphragm. But that's also hard because society tells us we shouldn't, right? Especially young ladies or women, or even if we're working out, we don't want our bellies poking out. So we don't end up breathing with our bellies, right? We end up breathing with our shoulders, which again activates that sympathetic nervous system or kind of inflames that sympathetic nervous system because we're constantly in this fight, flight, or freeze state. So focusing on the breath really helps us do that. And certain exercises, I always recommend one book called Breath. It gives a 14-week exercise and it really helps you expand your breath. It focuses on stretching out your intercostal spaces, giving you more places to breathe with your diaphragm, things like that. But there's one simple technique that people can use. And did we do box breathing on the first day? Did we do that? No, we did.
We
Haley.
did one of the first few. You did it.
Okay. Well, I think the box breathing is better, right? Because we have the exhale at a different pace, right? And that's the sole reason is to help us activate our parasympathetic nervous system. And I don't know if I told that same story then about doing the box breathing and the special operator who implemented it in the FBI training camp, that all he did was simply implement a breathing technique into a training event that had, I forget what the fail rate was, but a high fail rate. And then he implemented this breathing technique before and after, and then that jumped up to almost 92 or 93% of a pass rate, right? So we know that the breathing and focusing on it helps us be able to settle down to where we can make better decisions. So as we focus on that, an extended breath is something that we can do. A 3-part breath is something else that we can do, right? Is whenever we have this 3-part breath, is really just being able to feel it in your chest, feeling it in your belly, feeling it everywhere whenever you really take that deep breath in and create an environment that is acceptable through grounding and breath. I think another big piece whenever breathing and you're focusing on your breathing is grounding. Take your shoes off, feel your toes on the floor, go outside and do your breathing techniques. Maybe not in Colorado right now or potentially Indiana. Don't do it there because you might get hit with hail or your feet might fall off from frostbite. But, really get grounded and be able to do those things because ultimately focusing on our breath is really a great grounding technique. And again, I'll go back and say the book that I mentioned, and maybe we can find it, is Breath. And it's a guide that walks you through 14 weeks of breathing and several different breathing techniques. It explains the anatomy of the breath, the diaphragm being the largest breathing muscle that you have and why it's so important. And whenever we vertically breathe, another thing that doesn't happen is your diaphragm. If you breathe with your diaphragm, it massages all of your organs below, right? So everything below your diaphragm, like your intestines, your stomach, your kidneys, everything gets massaged by your diaphragm every single time you breathe. And if you're not moving it much, then those things aren't happening, right? So then you're also getting stagnation built up into your belly and different things like that. So our belly region, I shouldn't say belly, your belly region. Anyway, any questions about the breath before we move on? Any comments maybe or anything about the breath? Moving on. So meditation. So meditation, the different types of meditation. I think I jumped again. So meditation, practice allows you to become compassionate witness to what is happening. The main difference between mindfulness and meditation is mindfulness, you approach things with a non-judgmental attitude. In meditation, you're experiencing things as they are. If you have a non-judgmental thought in meditation, you're not steered away from that. In mindfulness, you are. Meditation typically lasts longer than mindfulness, but not necessarily. So just some common differences. Typically, there's some type of intention behind meditation as well. So another difference behind that as well. So a body scan, I couldn't find anything of people doing body scans in yoga. So this was the only picture I could find with someone doing an MRI. So this is what you get. Anyway, but whenever we do a body scan, there's a lot of science also behind the body scan. Physical therapists do this a lot with especially pain patients. Another thing that they do is something called body mapping. They will kind of run their finger down their back, right? And then say, when do you feel these things and different stuff like that. And people are so out of tune with their bodies, they have no idea what regions people are touching, things like that. So, doing body scans, getting in tune with your body is a great meditative tool. Let's see. And then a boundary practice, right? I know I mentioned boundaries earlier as part of staying in your window of tolerance. Boundary setting is something typically people in a professional setting have a very hard time doing, or not a professional setting, a helping profession have a very hard time doing, right? And I think part of it goes back to that emotional connection, right? Whenever we're more emotionally connected to it, the more that we'll be drained, but also the more we're going to be saying yes to things, right? Going above and beyond for something that we probably shouldn't be doing, going outside of our scope of practice because, we're so emotionally attached to it and we want to help people. So creating some type of boundary practice, right? And this kind of can be anything. It can be creating a ritual, a prayer, a visual, imagine a healing light, whatever it is, right? And this can be, something that can help out with that too. Engage in that ritual, prayer, visualization, whatever you want to call it, every time you start to do work with a new patient, right? So whatever that is. So whenever you are working with people, and I would especially say if you're having an emotional reaction to that person, meaning if you're getting ready to have your session with this person and you're already thinking of ways to get out of that session because you don't like it, because either they talk too much or whatever it is, whatever the reason is, you just don't like it, right? And you start to have those feelings, those are times to really be checking in, because those are the times that you're exerting more, right? Because now you're depleting yourself even more. So have those rituals, right? Whatever it is visualization of a light, a mindfulness practice, a love and kindness practice, whatever the boundary setting is, do that, and then engage in the same or another boundary practice whenever you complete your work for the end of the day, right? Cleaning up your workstation, kind of creating that time. In a time of virtual work, it's extremely hard to also take yourself away from work. Before, whenever we didn't telework, you were able to, basically get in your car and then completely separate yourself from work for a period of time. We no longer, well, I won't say we, a lot of people no longer have that option anymore. So creating some type of ritual at the end of the day is always meaningful. And typically any type of meditative practice, but typically, another thing that is always good at the end of the day is creating a checklist for the next day, right? So then that way it's already off your mind. You're not thinking about it when you go home, those types of things, or walk out of your office into your home. Mindful movement. I mentioned earlier, this doesn't necessarily have to be yoga. I have in here a lot of yoga things because, I am a certified yoga therapist, but I think that any mindful movement, we talked a little bit about gardening, but just walking, right? Walking your dog is something, right? Talk about attaching emotions to it that makes you feel good, right? Is walking your dog. That's a good opportunity for something that you love to be able to do, someone that you love or something that you love, and go do that, right? A natural movement as well. If you got a good dog, if your dog pulls you, it's no longer a good movement, but something just throughout the day that you can have that can kind of be consistent no matter what you do. And here I have sun salutations. For people who are not that familiar with yoga, sun salutations is a basic foundational move that you do in yoga. Schools in India actually do sun salutations before they start their day, instead of doing other, things. But literally in the schools, they'll pull out their yoga mats and do their sun salutations in parts of India. And there's, in my opinion, there is some benefit to working out, right? In the military, we work out in the morning typically, right? We don't work out in the afternoons like it seems like in the civilian world. Most people, the gyms are packed in the afternoons or evenings. To me, working out in the morning kind of sets that mindset to be able to do. So again, it doesn't have to be a sun salutation. It can be anything. Guided rest. So here, we can do one day a eye rest practice, maybe even today if we want to. But so eye rest and yoga nidra, so guided rest. Basically, there is a form of yoga called yoga nidra, and it is guided rest. And what happens is really you lay down in a shavasana. If y'all are familiar with that, you just lay down. You don't have to lay down, but basically you lay there and then, somebody reads a script to you or whatever, they talk to you while you're laying there. And the difference between it is this and regular, I guess, shavasana or other things is there's also you're doing a body scan. You're kind of just being in tune with your body, right? It's getting you in tune with your mind, body, and spirit is really what guided rest is. And really, another practice that I practice a lot is called eye rest. And this is a form of yoga nidra that came out of the DoD. And it's actually a tier 1 modality inside of the DoD is how powerful it became. And they really started working with patients whenever they started coming back from Iraq with TBIs, of course, all kinds of injuries that they were having. But the yoga nidra practice actually started, hundreds of years ago. And it started with this one guy named Swami in a yoga world. And he worked at a boys' home at the time. And there was a boy in there that just was not getting it, right? Just was not understanding. So then he used to go to the boy's bed at night and started praying beside his bed. And then the boy started getting better. So then he kind of thought, well, why don't we do this meditative practice during the day with everybody and see how it worked? And then yoga nidra was kind of born out of that mindset. And I don't know if anybody ever listens to anything while they sleep, but in hypnosis, if anybody's familiar with hypnosis, they also make you listen to scripts while you're sleeping. And the reason why is because of that, unconscious way of type of learning. And I always tell people whenever I was in the Marine Corps and I was in boot camp, they used to make us watch a video every single night for 2 weeks leading up to the rifle range because our senior drill instructor wanted us to win the rifle range. And I can recite that freaking video. He played it on repeat every single night. I can recite that entire video to this day, and that's been 20 years ago, right? That's how powerful, in my opinion, doing these types of things really are, right? Is guided rest. They also show through research that 45 to 60 minutes of eye rest is equivalent to about 3 hours of sleep. So another thing to keep in mind, it's not a substitute for sleep because it doesn't equal the same, but if you have an opportunity in the middle of the day to take a nap or do like an eye rest or some type of meditation, it would probably be better to do the meditation, right? Because you'll have a more rejuvenated brain whenever you wake up, I guess you can say, or are feeling better whenever you wake up versus sometimes whenever you wake up from a nap. Yoga nidra, I won't beat that up too much. So gratitude, finding time for a gratitude practice increases your overall sense of well-being. Has anybody in here ever had any type of gratitude practice before? How did that gratitude practice make you feel?
Good.
Huh? Good?
Yeah.
Good. So it made you. So what was your gratitude practice, if you don't mind sharing?
I selected showing gratitude for like writing cards to people. So I did like every week did a thank you card to somebody in my life about whatever I felt like doing at that time, but it was varied depending on the person, but just finding reasons to share gratitude with them.
That's awesome. That's a great practice.
That was a Laurie Santos course that I took that recommended something like that.
Yeah, that's a great one. So really being able to reach out and show somebody week after week, the gratitude. I bet that was awesome. Maybe sometimes kind of stressful of what you're going to say, right? In the letters, but like, oh shit. But I say pretty good. Another practice that I always think of with gratitude is love and kindness practices as well, right? There's a love and kindness script that is out there that people show love and kindness to themselves. I think we actually have a slide on this. But gratitude is something that is so easy to give and can have such a great reward for doing it, right? And yeah, love and kindness meditation. So really in love and kindness meditation, whenever I think about this, I had one coworker that I used to work with that absolutely hated his old boss. Well, actually, I supervised this guy, so I was his new boss, but he absolutely despised his old boss. And he had some valid reasons why, but ultimately he just, like, every time her name would pop up in work events, it was like nails on a chalkboard to him. He just absolutely hated this supervisor. And what I advised him to do one day, whenever we came out of a whatever meeting and she was in there, and he was just, again, like his physiological symptoms, like he was breathing fast, his face was red. I told him that he should start doing love and kindness practices every day before he comes to work. And when after he, may I be happy instead, may this person be happy, right? And show love and kindness to this person because he doesn't know everybody's situation, right? But see how that went. I always say he still hates her, but at least now he doesn't get, upset. I mean, I would say he would probably say he doesn't hate her anymore, but I would say he would probably, I would say that, but he can handle it better, right? And that's ultimately where we want to get. If we're having a physical response whenever we are in the presence of somebody else, that is emotionally draining, right? Whether it's good, bad, in between, that is not a good place to be, especially in a work environment. So compassion and compassion fatigue. So compassion, is a feeling of deep sympathy and sorrow for another person who is stricken by suffering or misfortune. And I think that's a pretty good definition. It is often discussed in relation to empathy, but empathy and compassion are two separate things. Compassion is more a focus, attention-oriented empathy. So it's kind of like a component of empathy. And to truly be present and in a state of compassion, you may experience moments of darkness or heaviness. So how many people here feel like they're pretty compassionate people? Yeah, I mean, most people, right, feel like it. Even though we know that compassion can be such a uh, heavy piece, is compassion worth it? Why? And I ask this reasonably because, this is one of the major movements in medicine, right? Is 40 to 50 years ago, again, doctors used to have that black bag that would walk to home, and they would treat the entire family, right? They would treat the kids, they would help deliver babies. They would treat the geriatric patients once they got to that age. They treated the entire lifespan of the patient, had all kinds of compassion for that. They knew their patient population. But then we took all that out, right? We focused on transference and countertransference, and we didn't want that anymore. We didn't want to know our patients to a way to where we had compassion, because it caused so much of a turmoil that it increased suicide rates in our providers. It increases divorce rates. It increases the stress that they have. So is compassion truly worth it? And if so, why?
I mean, yes, it's still worth it.
Like, no shit, right? Like yeah,
Yeah, like
it's worth it.
kindness and compassion is always worth it.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, like how do we manage the negative side effects of it? But I wouldn't say it's not worth it.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't think it's not worth it, right? Because it helps, we can read all these benefits, but ultimately the big picture is we feel good whenever we have compassion, right? We need compassion. If we didn't, we wouldn't be here in this class, that's for sure, right? If we if we didn't have compassion for others, we would not be here. Um, so that's something to kind of think about, right? Is we really need to think about that in a way that is compassion worth it? And I mean that in a way for our client population. Whenever we start narrowing down our client population and we start having a lot of compassion fatigue, is it worth it for you to still work with that population, even though it causes you turmoil? Even though it might be a healthcare executive that is just effing everything up, or a depressed mom who had their baby, and it's been forever, and they cut themselves or did something crazy, right? That we have all this compassion fatigue and want to help as many people as possible, but it increases our stress, and we have to have a wellness plan. So compassion fatigue is a state of exhaustion or dysfunction physically, mentally, and emotionally as a result of a cumulative impact of burnout, vicarious traumatic stress, and triggering of your own personal issues. That goes back to that transference and countertransference. But I'll also add, it is now a part of PTSD, or, part of the diagnosis now includes, even if the event did not happen to you, right? So you as a healthcare professional can technically develop PTSD by the stories that you listen to and the trauma that you listen to, because it's about the perceived threat of the world around you. A lot of times I talk about different environments, and I talk about the military, and a controversial topic is women being in combat armed positions, right? And I'm adamantly against it. I'll say it here. And the main reason why is because of the environment that they would be involved in, right? Increased stress creates other things, but also the environment that is created within a combat environment, is hostile. It's just other things. In my opinion, it's just not a place. It's just difficult to me to have that going on, right? So, whenever I think about things like that, I forgot even where I was going with this, but thinking about compassion fatigue and burnout and personal issues and the things that you have with the patient populations that you work with, and thinking about the issues that come up, and that may be an issue, right? Me working with women veterans that are in combat armed positions, right? Even though I may not agree with it, I may still have to work with those types of veterans in the future, and I have to find my way around it. I know last time I talked a little bit about working with transgender clients, right? And that's also challenging. In my, I explained that last time, but in a way that I never worked with them before, so I had no freaking idea what I was doing, right? So keep that in mind. Those are the stress things that will happen to us in our work environment that will create compassion fatigue. So causes of compassion fatigue, right? Professional isolation, lack of professional support. I would say almost everybody's done that, right? Poor boundaries. I think we talked a little bit about that. In a helping profession, we tend to have poor boundaries. Difficult client population. Again, I want to go back to let me ask if anybody's willing to. I'll say whenever I first started working with veterans again, I had a difficult time working with veterans at first, right? Is whenever I started working with them and I started hearing their stories. And then let's even say another thing that, Todd mentioned, I think one time last week, was working with veterans, non-combat veterans who have a service connection and can get their care at the VA. I think is some way that he said it that way. But, we have these biases in our mind whenever we start working with those patients. And even though it's a patient population that is near and dear to your heart, you're going to have those biases pop up, and it's going to cause compassion fatigue whenever you're emotionally attached to that as well. So long hours with few resources, ambiguous success, right? Failure to live up to one's expectation, especially whenever you have a boss who doesn't set expectations, things like that. Lack of social support, stressful lifestyle events and choices. We know all these things and we know the consequences of this, right? Reduced productivity, increased absenteeism at work, loss of personal effectiveness, psychological distress, our bodies hurt, we increase our anxiety and depression. But again, awareness, right? And the part of you all filling out that form is to begin awareness, right? Take it to work, give it to your colleagues, help other people build awareness. Just don't take an ownership of their awareness whenever you do it, especially if it's somebody that is a colleague or somebody, that's not one of your clients. That is not something that you need to take ownership of. That awareness, just because they have that awareness, doesn't mean you take ownership of it. So any questions about compassion and compassion fatigue? All right, so what is burnout? Has anybody ever experienced burnout? I know I have.
Yes.
Yes, yes, yes. So I guess tell me, whenever you all experienced burnout, what was some of the things that kind of caused it, or that you noticed even in yourself?
Kind of just frozen. Like I didn't know like what to do next, which felt like really overwhelming. When you're like an action driven person and then you were like a freestyler, you're like, okay, what's going on? Because this is not normal or style.
Yeah, so kind of frozen, right? Or are frozen, not kind of frozen. That atomic nervous system reaction, right? Frozen. What else? Anything else?
Apathetic.
Apathetic. Yeah, another good one, right? Kind of the opposite of empathy and all these other things, right? Of trying to, you kind of go in the opposite direction. The pendulum swings the other way. Yeah, I would say all of those things. Anything that you all kind of noticed? Well, actually, let's just go. So whenever we talk about 6 areas of work life that causes burnout, fairness, right? So whenever we think about fairness, I always think about the VA. So if anybody's ever worked in a government entity, the work is not created equal among the same job descriptions. And the reason why, I have no idea. It's because that it's a system, whenever you're working beside somebody and you have the same job description and you're busting your tail and that person is not doing anything and not getting wrote up for it, no accountability, the fairness levels are not there. So you're going to create, or you'll have an opportunity to start creating, exhaustion, cynicism, all those other things that you kind of associate with burnout. autonomy, right? If you have a lack of autonomy, I'm not saying you have to have free reign of everything, but you got to have some autonomy in the things that you do. And if somebody is micromanaging you, more than likely you're going to have some burnout, right? So another area, effort and reward. I think we kind of talked about that. If you're working your butt off and your job is only paying you something that you can't even make ends meet on, but then you could go do another job. I think another good example of this right now that I find a barrier for helping professions is McDonald's and minimum wage places are now paying something outrageous for that. But then if those same people, I won't say those same people qualify to potentially be a house parent in a residential facility. They have, the ability to be in these other places of work with the same educational level that they're in fast food. I think it's bad that we're paying those people so low on those other places, but at the same time, now that these other places have caught up to that pay, how many people are we truly going to have in those helping professions in the future? And I think that's a threat to everything that we do. And then values, right? If our values don't align, another big place. Workload's another big one too, right? And then community. So whenever y'all hear these 6 areas of work life that cause burnout, does any of this resonate with you all? Anything that you all might be willing to share whenever y'all see these 6 areas?
I have personally struggled in the past with bosses that micromanage. I cannot stand to be micromanaged because I always feel like I can be told what to do and then execute it. So when somebody's constantly checking in on me, it is the most annoying feeling. So I need autonomy in my career.
Yes, I am the same way. If I had somebody micromanaging me, I just couldn't do it. I just wouldn't do it. I would, I couldn't do it. Again, I get that you have metrics and you have all that, so I'm not taking anything away from that. Tell me what I got to do, hold me accountable to it, and I'll get it done. But don't check in with me every 2 minutes and then critique everything that I'm doing on the way that I'm doing it. Anyway, anything else that kind of stands out to everybody? Or maybe resonates with you? Nope. All right. Well, let's go. So 6 areas of work life that cause burnout. I would say another way to be able to use this in coaching, or a way to use this in coaching, is again think these are areas that you can talk to your clients about, right? Especially if you're working with people in the professional domain of coaching. So if you're doing that, these are areas that you should talk to people on a regular basis. And in my opinion, you can easily do this on a Likert scale, right? On, a scale of 1 to 10 or 1 to 5, whatever it is, how fair do you think your current career is, right? And kind of go all the way down through that and kind of start some good conversations whenever you're talking about coaching or whenever you're implementing this in the coaching. Does anybody have any questions about how or ways to implement this in the coaching? Okay. 3 dimensions of burnout. I think I mentioned exhaustion, right? Just feeling depleted, right? We have to be able to replenish ourselves. Cynicism. I know, I know this runs rapid. Typically, I always call this also the rumor mill. Cynicism creates the rumor mill, right? And then the rumor mill starts, and then that becomes, gold. And everybody starts talking about how bad work is, how bad maybe a boss is. And then ineffectiveness, right? Is if we have ineffective meetings, that's another thing that kind of, kills me, is however many meetings that you have. And then in the meetings, a meeting is not a time to review a document, right? A meeting is a time to come with answers to the document or questions or whatever it is. And it always kills me in ineffective meetings. Treating burnout, right? We've already took the first step, right? It's kind of starting to look at awareness, creating some type of awareness, and then create, different types of meditation mantras and practices. And here, I kind of put this meditation here just because I feel like this is a good one. It kind of gives examples of exhaustion. So whenever we talk about this particular, treatment of burnout, right, starting with some type of mantra that I am refreshed and renewed whenever you start seeing a new patient. Or if it's one of those patients that you don't want to see, right, because it's just going to be a battle or whatever it is. Maybe saying this before you go in to kind of fight some type of cynicism whenever you start to feel yourself being very negative, right? Is maybe create a mantra around I am hopeful and aligned with my greatest good. And then 3, the ineffectiveness. I balance effort with ease and accomplishment. Right? I think those are good mantras to kind of, look into. You can always create your own and come up with your own, but ultimately, this could be an easy practice that you could do in between seeing patients or at the beginning of your workday. Just, anything that you can do to kind of start looking at that. So now talking about vicarious trauma. And vicarious trauma is really, exactly what it says is you're having this learned experience of trauma through someone else's experience. And, this happens a lot. And I would say this definitely happens in the mental health field a lot. People who have to listen to the horrific things that people do to young kids, to the horrific things of war, to, sexual trauma, to whatever it is. And in certain therapy, they actually go through trauma narratives to where they get into a lot of detail around some of those things. I'm not saying I agree with that. I'm just saying whenever you're hearing those traumatic stories of those types of things, you're going to create some vicarious trauma. But I'll also relate this to coaching, right? As if you're narrowed down your population of who you want to work with, and that is so closely related to who you are and kind of who you were in your career. Sometimes again, people become vulnerable and then they tell you things that that might throw you off in a coaching session. And then that could also be a traumatic experience in a sense that they told you something of a traumatic experience that they had, right? That kind of comes out of nowhere. Causes of vicarious trauma. Again, this is actually a PTSD diagnosis now. So you can actually be diagnosed with having the learned experience of trauma from someone else. And the reason why is because it really, in my opinion, I'm trying to see if I put it in here, it really creates this new version of the world that you never had known before because now you've heard this traumatic event from another person. And I think a good one that I always think of with this is always a sexual trauma. If you hear of a sexual trauma that happened, and let's just say it was broad daylight, and or maybe that the person did everything that they possibly could to prevent it, right? And it still happened. Maybe it was on a college campus, maybe it was somewhere else, but it still happened. That could come up in a session, right? And then that could also, as a woman, create a new sense of danger in the world that also creates this new sense of PTSD type symptoms in yourself. So again, remember that just because it didn't happen to you, if you're having reoccurring thoughts of it, if you're having all those types of things, that can also be a PTSD diagnosis. Consequences of vicarious trauma, probably the same as burnout, right? All the other things, you now have a lost sense of the world, right? And are a new perception of the world. Maybe that's a better way to say that in a more of a strength-based way. But then you still have those same things, right? Down here you see poor sleep, substance abuse, intrusive thoughts, feelings of anger, isolation, all these other things that you can experience through vicarious trauma. Treating, right? Awareness is the first step. So now that we kind of know about it, we can start doing that. And I would say here, the big practical skill would be boundary setting, right? Whenever we know that we have vicarious trauma, but I'll also say, you can't stop something from popping up in a session. But what I will do and say is caution everybody who is going to be working with populations that are near and dear to your heart that you're emotionally attached to, because that is the area that has the most likelihood to cause more vicarious trauma. Does that make sense? So compassion, satisfaction, the pleasure that helping professions derive. Or, we get into, I always say for coaching, especially, it's difficult for us to not provide advice because we get that immediate gratification back, right? We get we're satisfied with the result because we were able to give somebody something. And, compassion, satisfaction kind of feels the same way. We feel satisfied with everything that we're doing. And, it's a great thing to kind of feel, but higher levels of compassion, satisfaction lead to lower levels of compassion, fatigue, burnout, and those other things, right? So kind of thinking that way. And causes of compassion, satisfaction, right? Perceived coping abilities, emotional separation from others' trauma. So not seeing their trauma as your own, again, being able to not have and think about and marinate on other people's trauma whenever you do hear those. Access to experience supervision. I will say, if you start to feel those things, in my opinion, you should always have a therapist. I personally feel if you're in any type of coaching, any type of helping profession, no matter what type of coaching you're doing or whatever it is, you should always be in therapy yourself. And if not, then at least checking in with a therapist on a regular basis. Social support, right? Healthy lifestyle choices. Experience helps, right? So getting that experience, hopefully, we're helping with that a little bit with some of these coaching sessions. Practice gratitude, we talked a little bit about that. And then special trauma training experiences, definitely understand trauma. If y'all have never worked in a mental health field, and this is kind of your first entry into a helping profession by being a coach, whether it's in, whatever field you're going into, I would still seek out specialized trauma in your continuing education, or specialized education and trauma in your continuing education and training, because it's not going anywhere. And I think it was another time we talked about ACEs, right? That's another big, research that's coming out, as adverse childhood experiences, and it's now all over the place. So I say all over the place, not as far as it needs to be, but it's starting to grow more and more. They got the emergency room trainings to everything. Like, it's starting to get more intertwined and everything. So find some specialized training and kind of maybe make an effort to do that every year or every other year. Consequences of compassion, satisfaction. This is, pride, joy, right? Better faith, time spent in prayer and meditation, smiling, listening, just having a good time. So really focused and really being able to get into a compassion satisfaction by creating those boundaries and really being able to do that. And here, vicarious resilience, I always think of birds of a feather flock together, right? And whenever somebody's being more resilient, then everybody's going to be more resilient. So there's also the opposite of vicarious trauma is also vicarious resilience. And I usually teach a lot to veterans. So, I usually always give an example of whenever somebody's charging the battlefield, right? It usually only takes one person, and then everybody else charges, because everybody has that experience of courage in that moment. And maybe fear, maybe everything else, but they have that moment. So everybody's going to follow that type of person. So everybody gets that courage. I think this is the same thing. If somebody's being resilient in that moment and trying to make decisions, kind of doing those types of things, then everybody else is going to do it as well. So mindful empathy. We talked a little bit about sympathy and empathy, so I won't kind of go through these, but really causes of empathy. Empathy initially begins with the emotional response, which is, again, I wanted to point that part out, because whenever we think of empathy and emotions and we go back to those domains, again, empathy is going to be more draining than, anything that you can kind of do. So think of that as well. Consequences of empathy, this response can lead you to focus on your own inner experience. So empathy without mindfulness can often lead to compassion fatigue. So we have to take a mindful and intentional approach to empathy. We shouldn't just blanketly give out empathy, right? Because if we did, we're going to be emotionally drained all the time. So mindful empathy. Mindful empathy allows you to care for others more effectively and in a way that leads to increased compassion satisfaction and decreased levels of compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma, and burnout. And moving through empathetic experiences mindfully, you can process your individual experiences more meaningful and remain more fully present for the other. Mindful empathy, really here again, right, is the self and other awareness, right? We have to start being able to bring this into awareness. That is the number one thing that we can always do, is bring it into awareness. And then perspective talking and self-regulation. So really self and other awareness, right? During an empathetic response, people often experience the same feelings of the person they are with, right? That's common knowledge. Another study through HeartMath Institute that Haley talked about earlier, they actually showed people's coherence and heart rate variability in different rooms. And one thing that they did was actually brought in a dog at one point, and then they'll take the dog out, but your heart rate variability actually syncs up with the people that you're around. So keep that in mind as well. And I'll go into that a little bit further. Does anybody know what is measured whenever they hook you up to an EKG? Does anybody know?
Your heart.
Yeah, your heart. But what in particular about your heart?
Rhythm.
Yeah, the rhythm. They're actually measuring the electrical current, right? So anytime that we have a fluid inside of our body, there's an electrical current, right? So we actually have, whenever they hook up people to brain sensors, and then they're tracking the electrical currents within their brain. So the EKG is tracking the electrical current. And every time that there's an electrical current, back to basic physics and things like that, is it creates a field, right? And that's ultimately things that we can track. So that field is what syncs up with other people. So just something, and that was through the HeartMath research. But again, it's the connections that we have once we're with other people. It's more than just being in the same area. Perspective talking, right? The distinction between self and others allow for a clearer perspective regarding the felt emotions and sensations you are experiencing. So, the distinction between self and others allows for the clearer perception regarding the felt emotions and sensations you are experiencing. So kind of having some of, the separation of that. And also I would say here, having that meditative practice can also help. Self-regulation, we have to be able to try to regulate ourselves, but we can't expect to regulate ourselves if we're not doing self-regulation techniques ongoing. If we expect to regulate ourselves the moment that we have that difficult client in front of us, or the moment that our kid spills the milk, or the time that whenever it is, we're not going to be able to regulate ourselves in those moments. And then how to respond with mindful empathy, right? Awareness around your sensations and feelings in the first step, right? Have awareness, and with intention, you're taking that first step. So your initial response is most often felt first in your body. So whenever you feel that emotional reaction, that is a time. There's another saying that I often say here too, and I can't remember the guy who said it, but there's a gap between stimulus and response, right? So the moment that somebody says something, you have a physical response. If you're self-aware and can know enough to know what that physical response is, then your response can be different, right? Because our initial response sometimes is not what our heart is, right? That's not our heartfelt response. It's an automatic thing that is happening. We blurt something out, and then now we can't take it back, even if we say sorry, right? Sometimes once we say it, then we're like, that's not what I meant, right? Oh shit, I didn't mean to say that. If we can really start to learn our bodies more, understand our breath, understand those responses, then we can really be able to hopefully take advantage of that gap between stimulus and response. And then a reminder, experiencing unconscious empathy and then intentionally engaging in the conscious components of mindful empathy is not a one-time practice, right? I think I said that before. You have to practice these things over and over again and take care of yourself, because you're not going to be able to be a coach. You're not going to be able to be anything if you can't take care of yourself first. So self-care, self-compassion, and empowerment. I think, self-compassion, we have to be able to give ourselves self-compassion. There are, consequences of self-compassion, right? We have an increased emotional well-being, greater levels of happiness, optimism, satisfaction with life and our environments, body appreciation, right? We could just go on and on with being able to have some type of self-compassion and self-love. And I think it's very important for us to focus on that. And that's why I'm also in favor of that love and kindness practice, because we show ourselves love and we do it first, because it's more important to show ourselves love first before we show somebody else love. Because, or is it truly love? Because we may not even know what love is if we can't even show it towards ourselves. Oh gosh, now it went too far. So 3 elements of self-compassion, right? Self-kindness versus self-judgment. I think that's self-explanatory. We want to be kind to ourselves and we don't want to judge ourselves. I'm not the component that you need to take judgment off of yourself completely, because also I think that judgment can create anxiety around certain goals and things like that in life. But as long as it's used in an appropriate way within that judgment and not based on the actions that you may have done or not done, right? Maybe it's not about the actions, but more about, do you want to accomplish getting that degree, or do you want to accomplish getting those things? Maybe that's a different thing to talk about. Common humanity versus isolation. We are, at the end of the day, social creatures. And if we take away social interactions, whether we agree with it or not, we turn into the Unabomber, right? Like everybody remembers the Unabomber, like he was out in the middle of nowhere, started blowing up everybody, right? Don't be the Unabomber. Be around some people. Don't be, really, a lot of research comes out of prisons, right? Whenever they have like a cop who goes to prison, or they have like a sex offender go to prison and they put them in social isolation, they end up going crazy. So, don't be in isolation either. And then number 3, mindfulness versus, over-identification. So definitely have a mindfulness practice mindfulness. Remember, there's 2 kinds of mindfulness. There's a formal practice, right? That's what you should be doing to kind of build up your mindfulness skills. And then there's those informal practices that kind of come up in the moment, and opportunities to use them in a moment. But you won't be able to do an informal practice if you don't have a formal practice. And then what is empowerment? And I think we hear this word a lot, right? We hear empowerment a lot in society, especially today, I feel like more than ever. And I feel like a lot of times we don't even have a working definition of what empowerment means. And the process of becoming stronger and more confident, especially in controlling one's life and claiming one's rights. I feel like that's a pretty good definition of empowerment. So, I do feel that we have to have the empowerment. And then whenever we have empowerment, we have better boundaries. We have our practice. This is yoga and meditation, but really that's any practice. It's Nicole in her backyard doing her gardening. Yeah, and going to go see her PT because now she's hurt because of it. So, but boundaries, right? Creating strong boundaries, sense of satisfaction. If we don't have a sense of satisfaction in the things that we do, we have an ability to create that compassion fatigue. So self-care, we need to be able to have a self-care plan. And hopefully by now, through the training, we've been able to show you all how to create that self-care plan by creating those long-term action or those long-term behavioral goals and small action steps. But more importantly, with that self-care plan, there needs to be things throughout your day that you can enjoy and revert back to, whatever it is, whether it's a mantra that's written on your computer, whether it's a dot that you look at in between sessions. It could be a slew of different things. It could be just sitting there doing a sun salutation in between, seeing people, whatever it could be. But take care of yourself. And definitely try to do it through connection, right? We are human beings at the end of the day, and we always need to be able to take care of ourselves. And creating awareness, we've already did this. So now we are done. So just kind of on the conclusion here, everyone's perfect practice is unique and changes over time. If you have the same practice now for your meditation, yoga, working out, that it is, 5 years from now, that's probably not right either. It should change over time. Be mindful of opportunities to see which breathing, meditation, and mindful movements and guided rest that are called to you and work for you, right? So be on the lookout for that. Keep a resource guide, whatever you can, because if it works for you, you should have a resource guide for your clients too, right? And then I will also always add, never actually recommend a resource that you hadn't tried out either whenever I'd say that. So if you try the resource out, at least log on, but at least this way you give more credibility to this whenever you can say, I did this and this was the result whenever you use elicit, provide elicit. So don't be afraid to fail. Change your mind or schedule or create entirely new practice for yourself. This is an ongoing process, and it's always going to change and adapt and evolve over time. The only constant thing in this world, right, is change. All right. Well, that is mindful resilience for compassion fatigue. Does anybody have any questions, comments, concerns?
I have a question.
Go for it.
So I use heart math as well, but you obviously have to pay for that. Now, would that be something that you would suggest to somebody, even though they have to come out of pocket for it?
Yeah, and the way that I do that, I will say with heart math, I use heart math too. You're talking about the tech piece in heart math, right?
Yeah.
It's like 100 and actually I think they came out with a new one now. It's even more expensive. I'll say for
Yeah, it's
you,
like
you get your
250.
care at the VA.
No, with my therapist, I did it.
Oh, okay, I was going to say the VA will issue you those heart math sensors now. So
Oh, really?
yeah, something to think about. Sometimes insurance companies may, sometimes they don't. It just depends on your insurance company. Uh, but yeah, heart math, I would recommend. And the way that I usually do that is I just tell them like this is an out-of-pocket cost. It's challenging. There are some practices that you can do with heart math, like heart focused breathing, free. You don't need anything for it, right? Or whatever. And, just kind of tell them kind of the whole gist of it and give them the whole rundown and then do that. I'll say Haley alluded to it. We did the Resiliency Advantage trainer program through Heart Math. I would, if I was to recommend anything for people to go through Heart Math, I'd say just go ahead and go get trained in it because you go through the same process that you do as a patient, but then they just teach you how to teach it on top of it. So, just if you're going to pay money, that's what I would, for that one in particular, maybe not all of them,
Yeah.
but. Let's see, any other questions or comments?
I will say if you ever do recommend something like that that's out of pocket, which is totally fine, also have something in your back pocket to recommend if they do say cost is a challenge, right? So if they say, hey, that's kind of hard for me to do, go ahead and have some different things you can reference to and say, well, that's okay. Maybe try something like this. That way it kind of gives them a scale to pick from.
And I'll also add, this is probably a double-edged sword, and we can talk about this more next week when we talk about scope of practice and those types of things. Is also I would try to add a way for you to get revenue from that if you're in private practice. So just another piece of that. You can partner with HeartMath, and maybe it's that you sell the tech for them and then you keep 10% of it. You know, whatever it is, there's always other ways to kind of partner and think that way. And in business, I'm not saying think about that all the time, but, you know, think about the business that you can generate from those types of things, you know. Because again, whether it's a supplement, whether it's, Lord, I don't know, whether you're going to record yourself to give them that subliminal message, you know, that they did in Yoga Nidra, and you're going to start giving that to people, you should sell that, right? That should be something that you, whether it's a membership fee, whether it's whatever it is, right? Start to think that way. We'll talk more about that in our business module. I forget when that is. That might be the last day, but I can't remember. But anyway, any other questions or comments? Nope. All right. Well, let's get off here. So Pat, for you, Haley will send you a eval and then we'll get you CEs for tonight too. All right. All right. Thanks, everybody. Actually, let me open it up. One last thing before y'all jump off. Any questions, comments, heartaches with getting scheduled for your mentors and try our dyads? I know Sade's not here, so we're missing one. I think there was a hiccup with that, but any other hiccups that we're running into or anything? So clear as mud. All right. So no questions yet. All right. Well, if there is, reach out to us, let us know. Otherwise, I will see you all next week. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.